So Dillian Whyte has apparently changed trainers again. Early on in his career, he was with Chris Oko. Then he was with Jonathan Banks. Then he was with Mark Tibbs. Then he was with Xavier Miller. And now he's hooked up with Buddy Mcgirt. Now, Buddy Mcgirt, of course, was a top-level professional in his day. And since retiring, he's trained a number of top pros from Arturo Gatti to Sergey Kovalev, and now apparently Dillian Whyte. Now, Buddy Mcgirt was a very technical fighter, and he tries to instill that in the people he trains. I mean, we saw that with certainly Arturo Gatti. He added, I want to say, a couple years on to Gatti's career by turning him from a pure brawler, a pure slugger, into more of a boxer puncher. He utilized Gatti's athleticism because Gatti did have decent athleticism. You know, he wasn't like a Brandon Rios or an Antonio Margarito. He wasn't that type of slugger who lacks athleticism. No, Gatti was pretty athletic. He was no Mayweather, but he was pretty athletic. And Mcgirt recognized that and got him to box more and move more and upper body movement and all that kind of stuff. He did a pretty good job with Arturo Gatti. And a similar thing with Sergey Kovalev. Kovalev was very and I don't even want to say right-hand happy, but he fell in love with his punching power. And he obviously lost to Andre Ward, but then he hooked up with Buddy Mcgirt. I can't remember if he hooked up with Buddy Mcgirt straight after the Ward fight or if it was after the loss to Alida Alvarez. I can't remember what it was. But either way, he hooked up with Buddy Mcgirt, and Buddy Mcgirt took him back to basics, got him back on his boxing, got him to stop looking for knockouts and just concentrate on outboxing guys. And if the knockout comes, it comes, that kind of thing. Now, that type of trainer with Dillian Whyte is going to be apparently training in California for his next camp. That kind of trainer with Dillian Whyte, I don't really think he can add much to Dillian's game, to be honest with you. Because Dillian's always known how to box. He's always had a good boxing brain. The problem with Dillian is he lacks the athleticism to execute certain boxing moves in a neat and tidy way. So when he tries to execute a lot of boxing moves, it looks sloppy. His balance is poor. He's poorly coordinated. And again, look how many trainers he's worked with in the past. From Chris Oko to Jonathan Banks to Mark Tibbs to Xavier Miller. Even Harold Knight was involved. You seriously think that of all these trainers he's worked with, none of them tried to address his balance issues and his coordination issues and his footwork issues? Of course they've tried to address this stuff. But as I say, the problem here is really Dillian's biomechanics. And that's something you can't change. You can try to improve your biomechanics a bit. You know, you can really train and discipline your body through muscle memory to restrict your movements or control your movements and so on. But you're never going to turn a guy like Dillian Whyte into someone who's as smooth as an Alexander Usyk, just to use an extreme example. You're never going to be able to do that. He doesn't have the biomechanics for it. So, yeah, hooking up with Buddy Mcgirt, I mean, training in America, sparring over there, whatever. I don't really think that's going to do much for him either. I don't think the American experience will do much for him. I don't think training with Mcgirt will really add much to his game, because Dillian Whyte, in terms of his mentality, is a pure fighter. I mean, this guy is a warrior and a fighter through and through. There's not really much that I would want to change or add to Dillian Whyte in terms of his mentality, because he ticks all the boxes mentally. And that's why Dillian Whyte got as far as he did. Because, again, based on talent, he isn't one of the most talented fighters in the heavyweight division and never has been. But in terms of his mentality, he's got an elite mentality, right? Tremendous self-belief, dogged determination, massive heart. He's got the mindset for big fights. You know, he doesn't go in there and just freeze. He rises to the occasion, but of course, when he's been beat, he just hasn't been good enough. So he's tried his best, but it just wasn't good enough. And I include in that the performance against Fury, because some people would disagree. They'd probably agree with the AJ fight. They'd probably agree with, you know, Povetkin and so on. But with regards to the Fury fight, a lot of people think that Dillian underperformed. I don't think he did underperform. I think that he did as well as he could have possibly done. I think if he'd come out swinging the way some people think he should have done, he would have got knocked out earlier, to be honest. And I think he knows that, which is why from the opening bell, it was cautious aggression. It wasn't like all out attack. So, yeah, I don't think he underperformed against Fury. I think he did as good as he could have done, and Fury was just a much better fighter and picked a perfect game plan to fight Dillian Whyte with. Frustrated him, and then got Dillian Whyte to abandon the cautious aggression and go into come forward slugger mode. And that's when Tyson Fury was able to catch him. If he'd been in come forward slugger mode from the beginning, as I say, I reckon he would have got knocked out earlier. So, yeah, I don't really see what Buddy Mcgirt can add. I don't really see what he can change. Everybody else has tried to change the technical aspects of Dillian Whyte. Perhaps Buddy Mcgirt has different techniques, but again, at 30, what is he, 33, 34, Dillian Whyte? What are you really going to do with him at this stage? So, yeah, he's always been limited by his biomechanics. And more recently, he has been showing a lot of vulnerability in terms of punch resistance over the past few years. Like serious vulnerability. He's been knocked out with one punch twice in his last 3 fights. That's not good. Right? For one, you're getting caught with big shots like that, both uppercuts. And for 2, your body is not reacting well when you get clipped. So, you know, the fights that Dillian Whyte is talking about with the likes of Daniel Dubois, Joe Joyce, Anthony Joshua, all 3 of those guys can crack. And all 3 of those guys, even though I would say AJ probably has the weakest chin out of the 3, AJ, I think, has got better punch resistance than Dillian Whyte at this stage. You know, I don't class AJ as someone having a particularly solid chin, but I reckon at this stage his chin's better than Dillian Whyte's chin. And that's saying something. And he's a good puncher himself, Anthony Joshua. He might not be as ferocious mentally as Dillian Whyte, but if he's got a better chin and if he's more skillful and got better balance, maybe he doesn't have to be. He's already knocked him out once. And Dillian Whyte was a lot more durable when they fought first time around. So if they were to fight in a rematch, oh yes, I'll be picking Anthony Joshua in a rematch. As far as Joe Joyce, Dillian Whyte recently said that he's got the power to knock Joe Joyce out. If he caught Joyce with his absolute best left hook, maybe he could drop him. Maybe he could knock him out. But I suspect that there's a higher chance of Joe Joyce catching Dillian Whyte with a fight-ending shot than there is of Whyte catching Joyce with one. I know Joyce does get caught, but he's also got this powerful jab. And as I say, I just don't trust Dillian Whyte's punch resistance at all at this stage. I think that he doesn't take a shot as well as Joseph Parker. Parker was able to last nearly 11 rounds with Joyce, took a lot of big shots. I think if Dillian Whyte was getting hit with the same shots Parker was getting hit with in the 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds, I think Dillian Whyte would be going down. And I think he might be staying down from them kind of shots. Now, obviously, it's a different dynamic. Dillian Whyte is definitely a more tenacious fighter than Parker. He's more vicious. And he's more prolific with his best shot, which is the left hook. You know, you see the amount of people that Dillian Whyte has dropped or knocked out clean with that left hook. It's more than Parker's done with his right hand or his left hook. And I'm talking about good opponents. So, yeah, it's a different dynamic. But ultimately, I would be picking Joe Joyce there too. And the Daniel Dubois fight, I think, is probably Dillian Whyte's best bet. Because of the fact that Dubois is still somewhat green, we did see some mental fragility in that Joe Joyce fight where he quit. And again, for those of you who haven't heard me talk about fighters quitting before, I am not one to ridicule fighters for quitting in tough fights when they have apparently, supposedly fractured eye sockets, because we don't know that about Daniel Dubois. It was said, but no evidence was produced. So as outsiders looking in, are we to take that claim at face value? You know? Whatever. Either way, it was a tough fight for Daniel Dubois as I was swollen up. He was in there with a big man, hitting him with solid shots on the eye. I'm not sitting here saying Daniel Dubois is, a coward or this, that, or the other, because I'm not in his shoes. I wasn't the one taking him Joe Joyce punches in my eye. But I'm just straightforward about what happened. And what happened was Daniel Dubois quit. So I'm not making a judgment about his, whether he's, I don't even want to use the terms that Tyson Fury uses for people who quit in fights and what have you, because, YouTube algorithm and whatnot. So I'm not trying to slag him off, basically. I'm just describing what happened. So Dubois is still somewhat green. He's shown some mental weakness. And of course, he can really punch. I mean, I would say he probably punches harder than Joyce. He's a really powerful puncher, powerful jab. But he's upright. And a veteran like Dillian Whyte might have certain tricks and certain moves which could surprise Daniel Dubois and catch him off guard, lure him into traps. Do you know what I mean? I can see that kind of scenario playing out. But of course, if Daniel Dubois lands clean on Dillian Whyte, the show's over. Dillian Whyte goes to sleep and doesn't wake up for at least 10 seconds. That's my view on it. But in my head, that's the most winnable fight for Dillian Whyte, is the Daniel Dubois fight. And I'm still not saying that I'm picking him in that fight. But I just think it's more winnable than the other two, AJ and Joe Joyce, for the reasons I've explained. So, and also, Daniel Dubois is not as big as AJ and Joe Joyce. He's not as heavy and he's not as tall. And he's not as mobile either. Even though Joe Joyce is a real big, heavy guy, he's got quick feet. He can move in and out quickly and close the distance quickly and all that kind of stuff. He can stick you on the end of a jab if he wants to. So, yeah, Daniel Dubois doesn't have that kind of foot speed. He's not as tall. He's not as heavy. And I just think Whyte would find it easier to get to him. And he was also stiff. Daniel Dubois got stiff back. I think Whyte would find it easier to get to him and catch him with shots than with the other two. So, yeah, that's just my take on it. I know there's going to be some of these weirdos who claim that I hate Dillian Whyte because he said something vaguely critical about me like 4 years ago in a Boxing Social interview, which is completely absurd. I mean, good God, people. How childish must your mentality be to think that I would be so upset about him saying something mildly critical? He bigged me up in that interview. He literally bigged me up. He said, shout out to Hatman, and bigged me up. And somehow, because he said, oh, Hatman's a funny one, because sometimes he compliments me and he says good things about me, but other times he talks rubbish and has a go at me. So he's a funny one. I mean, Dylan didn't understand the concept of my channel, which is objectivity. I'm not about fanboying for one fighter and supporting certain fighters. No, on my channel, no fighter is below praise and no fighter is above criticism. But in any event, Dillian Whyte was basically complimentary of me in that video, but somehow these weirdos online have come up with this bizarre theory that I hate Dillian Whyte based upon what he said in that video. It's just weird stuff. No, I don't hate Dillian Whyte. I've got the greatest amount of admiration for Dillian Whyte as a fighter because the man is a pure warrior. As I said earlier on, when it comes to mentality, there's not much I would really change about his mentality. He's just a pure warrior, this man. And he's been that way, I guess, since a kid. Because when I was watching those very early interviews with Dillian Whyte, this is before his ban, this is long before he fought AJ, when he was first turning pro. And he talked about how he got into combat sports. And he said he went down to a kickboxing gym. And the first time he went to the gym, he said he wanted to spar. And he went in there and he tried to go hell for leather with, I guess, some of the best guys in the gym. And he said that they basically beat the living daylights out of him. Right? And normally when that happens, the guy won't turn up the next day. That's typical. If someone goes in there, gets battered in sparring, and it's their first time sparring, they won't come back to the gym again. But Dillian Whyte was back the next day and he wanted to spar with the very same guy. And he kept going back over a number of weeks and months and getting battered and battered and battered and battered. But after a while, he started getting good and he started battering the guys who were beating him up for all those weeks and months. And so those kickboxing guys recognize, okay, this guy's mentality is different. He's got something special here in terms of his mentality. He might not be the most talented physically, but he's got the mental toughness. He's got the fortitude. He's got the determination. So when I was watching him interviews, I was like, okay, yeah, this guy's got something mentally. People weren't seeing it because of his lack of athleticism and coordination and all that, but the mentality that he has is not common, even among fighters, right? Usually you only find that kind of mentality among top-level fighters, world-class fighters. And not all world-class fighters have it to the same extent that Dillian Whyte does, that kind of determination. And also he was talking about his sparring, where before he turned pro, he sparred David Haye, he sparred Derek Chisora. And remember, Dillian Whyte only had a handful of amateur bouts. He had a bunch of kickboxing fights, yes, but he only had a handful of amateur boxing bouts. And he was going in there sparring David Haye and Derek Chisora with minimal experience, and these are very experienced pros. And he's going for it in sparring against them. He's not like going in there intimidated and they're just walking him around and trying to help him out as a novice. No, Dillian Whyte's going in there trying to take their heads off. Again, that's unusual. That's not the normal thing that you're going to get from a novice like that. Going in there trying to take a former world champion David Haye's head off. Do you know what I mean? When David Haye was still a dangerous fighter. That's not normal. So when I heard him say that, I was like, okay, again, this guy's got something here. And of course, he was going around all these different camps, sparring David Price, who was unbeaten at the time. I think he sparred Mark Potter, the Klitschko's. He sent him, got himself over to Germany. Fury, obviously. So he's sparring all the top guys. And this is somebody that doesn't have an extensive boxing background. So again, his mentality is elite. Do you know what I mean? He has that elite mentality. And that's what has carried him so far, along with his, he's got physical strength. He's got punch and power. But he's not a fast fighter. He might have a fast hook, left hook, but that's about it. Other than that, he's got a good jab and he knows how to box. But the biomechanics limit his ability to execute the technique. Anyway, I'll leave it there. That's my take on Dillian Whyte hooking up with Buddy Mcgirt. I wish him well. I hope it works out well for him. But when you've got a heavyweight who has the limitations that Dillian Whyte has, and also this rapidly deteriorating punch resistance, it's hard to be optimistic about his future at whatever he is, 33, 34 years of age. It's hard to be optimistic. So let me know what you guys think in the comments.
If you're tired of the biased narratives and mass censorship on mainstream platforms, and you want to be part of a community of critical thinkers who love free speech just as much as you do, then come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide variety of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&As, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high-quality MP3. We've also got an Element group where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. Unlike Discord, it has full end-to-end encryption, is decentralized, and it's 100% censorship-free. You can also send voice notes as well as much larger audio and video files than you can on Discord. So come and sign up on Patreon. There's no contract, there's no commitment. You can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a cup of coffee. So I'll see you over there. I'm out.